There are places in the jungle where maps don't show and where people never return. We slept next to one of them. I've never liked using the word pristine. It always feels like a sales pitch, like someone trying to brand a place too ancient to care what we think of it. But when I first set up camp in the core zone of the Hoh rainforest, I didn't have a better word. Pristine. Undisturbed. Untouched by human noise or movement. No trails, no air traffic, no chance encounter with a stranger, not even a flyover. Just dense green dripping with quiet. That kind of silence is rare, even in so-called wilderness. I wasn't just here for solitude. I was here for sound. I'm a field biologist, but I specialize in acoustic ecology, the science of listening to living places, how frogs adjust their calls in flooded years, how insect populations rise and fall with the temperatures, how root systems shift their groans during drought. The sounds that we've evolved past noticing, but that still rule the forest. This wasn't my first expedition, but it was the first time I'd ever been granted access to a no-human impact zone within a national park. There's a core area in Olympic that's so remote they don't let anyone in without research credentials and a hard clearance from tribal authorities. You can't even fly a drone within 10 miles. I got in because I convinced a panel that if we wanted a true audio baseline of pre-industrial ecosystems, what the world sounded like before we polluted it with engines, towers, and leaf blowers, this was the place. It took 3 days to bushwhack in. No trails, just compass bearings, topographic overlays, and faith that my GPS tracker would keep beaming my location back to the park office. I carried 38 pounds of gear, a modular tent, 2 weeks of freeze-dried food, rainwater filtration system, and my rig, 4 parabolic mics on collapsible tripods, a multi-channel recorder, and a low-power solar array for battery cycling. I'd also brought passive soil sensors and a thermal camera on the off chance I could spot any apex fauna passing through. The day I arrived, the air was thick and warm with decomposing cedar. Ferns sloped overhead like parasols, dripping with condensation even in the middle of the afternoon. I found a relatively flat patch of moss-crusted ground and set up camp just off a game trail carved decades ago by elk. Not a footprint in sight. No rappers, no signal, not even a buzz in my radio. The first night was uneventful. I did what I always do. Set my recorders to passive capture, pointed them at 4 directions, and drifted off to the distant clicks of frogs and the shuddering whoop of barred owls, the sound of healthy territory. But the second night is when something changed. I just finished dinner. The freeze-dried mushroom risotto didn't taste like much, but I wasn't here for the cuisine. I sat cross-legged on a foam mat inside my tent, reading through the audio log from the previous 24 hours. I was noting variations in the dawn chorus, jays calling earlier than expected, the staggered rhythm of a tree fall that had come down sometime near 3 a.m., when I heard it. Faint. Delayed. But unmistakable. My breathing. Not the sound I was making now in the moment. Not an echo. Something different. A low, rhythmic inhale-exhale that had been captured sometime after midnight. Slow, deliberate. And just under the surface, you could hear movement. Something brushing the undergrowth with the cadence of a body leaning forward, then back. My initial reaction was academic. I marked the timestamp and tagged the file for review. Probably just a bear or a stray elk passing through close to the mic. Maybe I'd slept a little louder than I thought. Could have been wind, maybe. The forest speaks in its own grammar. You learn not to jump at things. But as I isolated the frequencies and filtered the gain, I realized something was off. The breathing wasn't mine. Or if it was, it wasn't at the right time. It occurred about 6 minutes after I'd zipped into my sleeping bag. I always run a clap test when I go to bed, a sharp hand clap to mark the shift in activity, which I use to time behaviors around the tent. The breathing started long after that, too far out to be a sleep mumble, and I hadn't snored. Not once. It also wasn't near the tent. It came from Mic 3, the one facing northeast toward the grove of twisted maples that the elk trail led into. The breathing started soft, grew a little louder, then retreated. But the real issue wasn't the breathing itself. It was that halfway through the recording, the rhythm stuttered, like someone copying a pattern without understanding how lungs work. The inhale hit a strange beat, too long, then too short, like a mimic trying to stay in sync but slipping. I sat there with my headphones tight against my ears, rewinding the section again and again, watching the waveform jump where no wind should have been. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up, poking out through the tent flap with my headlamp off, listening for real-time movement. They stayed quiet. Even the frogs stopped calling around 2 a.m. That silence, more than anything, unnerved me. I've spent hundreds of nights alone in wild places, but silence like that, that's when you listen with your bones. The next morning, I hiked out about 50 yards to Mic 3. Nothing was disturbed. No drag marks, no bent fern fronds. The moss hadn't been crushed or stepped on. But when I leaned in close, I noticed something strange. The metal bracket that held the mic upright was cold. Not damp, not cool from shade. Cold. Like the kind of cold you get from evaporative cooling on a hot pipe. The mic face, which was covered by a hydrophobic screen, had dew on it despite full sun. It shouldn't have. I replaced the memory card, shifted the angle by 3 degrees, and chalked it up to a thermal anomaly. The forest breathes just like we do. Maybe this part was just exhaling. But that night, as I finished logging data from the news cycle, I found a second anomaly. This time it wasn't breathing. It was a footstep, just one. Heavy, organic, but not human. I know how people walk. This had a drag to it. A loose heel-to-toe motion that didn't match deer or elk cadence. And worse, it came right after my own movements had stopped. I always log my audio processing vocally. Small verbal notes like logging 2100 hours or recorder off, mic swap. That night, I'd said sleep cycle beginning at exactly 10:37 p.m., then zipped the tent closed. The mic fell into silence. And then, 9 minutes later, crunch. Not on gravel, not on brush, on moss. Like something pressed itself down slowly, knowing how to spread its weight, but not quite knowing how to avoid sound. I didn't move. I didn't sleep. I lay there the whole night, heart thudding so loud I was sure the recorder would pick it up. At one point, I swear I heard a breath again. Real this time, just outside the tent, right around where the mic had been. But when I reviewed the files the next day, there was no audio at all from that period, just static. The mic hadn't malfunctioned. I checked the diagnostics. All hardware was working. It had simply gone dead. And when I opened the log from Mic 3's memory card, the folder had renamed itself. It just said, "Listen back." And that's when I knew I wasn't here alone. I stared at that folder name for a long time. Listen back. It wasn't a system error. The recorders don't label anything automatically. They log files by timestamp and mic ID and nothing else. For a folder to rename itself, either I had done it deliberately while asleep or in some kind of fugue, or something had accessed the card. But it wasn't just the name. It was what was inside. Inside the folder were 3 files, each about 30 seconds long, all recorded within the same 10-minute span in the middle of the night. And each one, when I played it, started the same way, with my voice, but not my words. The first file began with a breath, deep, shaky. Then, almost whispered, it said, "He's listening." My voice, my cadence, my breath pattern. But I never said that. I'd never even thought that phrase before hearing it. It was like hearing yourself in a dream you hadn't had. The second file started similarly, but the voice sounded closer to the mic, like it was moving toward it as it spoke. Same tone, same vocal texture, but slurred slightly, like a recording that's been copied one too many times. He moved the mic. Don't let him leave. I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise as that sentence ended, not with breath, but with a soft knocking sound, like a knuckle on bark. 3 slow taps, not random, intentional. The third file was silent for the first 20 seconds. Then, out of the noise floor, came something low, mechanical, almost rhythmic, a kind of shifting static that coalesced for just a moment into the sound of breathing. Not human, not even animal exactly, but timed, like something mimicking lungs with just enough delay to make you uncomfortable. That file ended with a click, just a single, sharp click, like a jaw closing. I shut the recorder, I powered everything down, I went outside the tent and checked all 4 mics, checked the surrounding woods. No broken branches, no new prints, no sign of intrusion. But when I looked at mic 3, I noticed something different, a faint smear of condensation along the parabola plate, just enough to trace a shape. Not a fingerprint. No ridges. Just an impression, wide, flattened, like a face had pressed against it. I wiped it off with the sleeve of my jacket, suddenly furious with myself. I was getting spooked. That's all. I'd probably mislabeled a file. Maybe I'd recorded myself and forgotten, caught some audio from a half-sleep moment. It was explainable. Everything is, if you don't jump at shadows. Still, I moved the tent, just 20 yards, just enough to reset the mental field. But that night, as I tried to drift off, I kept waking up to the sense that something was breathing in sync with me. Not audibly, not even physically. Psychologically, it's hard to explain. But every time I exhaled, I felt mirrored. Like somewhere in the dark, a mind was watching, and when my lungs emptied, its expectation of that breath emptied too. A kind of echo with no sound, no delay, no origin. I started sleeping with the recorder running inside the tent. Not outside anymore. I wanted proof. Not of an animal, not even of a person, but of my own mind. The recordings didn't help. Every morning I'd listen back and hear things I didn't remember doing. Shuffling movements, quiet throat noises. Once I heard myself whisper, "Don't look behind you," even though I swear I didn't say a word all night. And that wasn't the worst of it. On the 5th day, I lost time. I'd been logging data around 10 a.m., reviewing audio files, checking soil sensor levels, recording daily ambient temp. I remember sitting down in front of the tent, writing in my field book. The sun was high, diffused through the mist, but still warming the moss. And then I blinked, and the sun was gone. Not dimmed. Gone. Twilight blue light everywhere, like the forest had skipped noon and gone straight to dusk. My field book was in my lap, my pen still in my hand, but the page I'd been writing on was full, a whole paragraph I didn't remember logging. Repeat patterns begin, voices under canopy, root structures humming. I hadn't written that. I know my handwriting. It was close, but the letters were a little too clean, the spacing too wide. As if someone had learned my style and was trying it out with a steadier hand than mine. I checked my watch. 6:42 p.m., I had no memory of the missing hours. My first instinct was to bail, pack up and leave. Abandon the rest of the expedition and hike back to the exfil point. But then I remembered, I was 3 days out. No trails, no sat signal. If I panicked and got off course, I could get myself killed before I hit even the outer fire roads. So I made a decision. One more night, I'd keep everything running. I'd leave all 4 mics hot. I'd stay awake, eyes open, light off, and listen. If anything moved in that forest, anything real not imagined, I'd hear it. And I did. Around 2:13 a.m., mic 2, facing due west, picked up a new signal. It started faint, a shuffle, a pull, then a slow dragging step, and then another, heavier than a person but not four-legged. Bipedal but asymmetrical. I heard a long exhale, dry, grating. Then it said my name. Not shouted, not whispered, just spoken, flat, toneless, from a mouth that wasn't built to speak. David. I froze. For a second, I thought I was dreaming, but the recorder kept capturing. The waveform was there. It said it again. David, David. Each time, slightly wrong, like it was figuring it out, like it liked the shape of it. That's when I realized I hadn't told anyone I was using this site. The permit had been approved under a coded research number. My emergency beacon didn't have my name logged in the broadcast. Nobody out here knew me. Nobody. But the recordings. I scrambled out of the tent, flashlight jerking wildly across trees, breath burning in my chest. I pointed the beam toward Mike 2's quadrant, past the fallen nurse log, into the mist. And for a split second, just a second, the light caught movement, a shape, not a person. Not quite. It moved like it was listening. And when I turned off the light, I heard my own breathing echo back, but it wasn't mine. I held my breath, suddenly terrified of giving it anything more to mimic. My flashlight dangled at my side, beam off, my fingers trembling against the switch. The silence after that false breath was brutal, so sharp and complete it felt like the forest itself was holding still, waiting to see what I'd do next. I wanted to believe I imagined it, that it was some trick of acoustics, my own heartbeat playing off the trees. But I knew better. I study sound. I live inside waveforms. I know what an echo is, and that wasn't one. What I heard was independent, separate, listening, reacting, breathing when I didn't. And the worst part was how close it had gotten, how exact it had become. I backed toward the tent slowly, keeping my body low, making sure I didn't trip on any roots. I didn't dare speak. I didn't even dare zip the tent closed. I just crouched inside and slid the flap down gently, leaving it slightly open so I could see if anything moved past. For hours, nothing did, or at least nothing I could detect. The forest returned to its dripping stillness. Even the frogs resumed their distant calls around 4 a.m., though I noticed they came in at odd intervals, like they were being interrupted, like something was interfering with the rhythm. I didn't sleep, couldn't. Instead, I stared at the display on my audio recorder, watching the waveform twitch at intervals I couldn't explain. At one point, it picked up what sounded like soft humming, not melodic, not human, just a low harmonic resonance, like someone dragging a bow across a steel cable too slowly to produce pitch. It only lasted 7 seconds, but it was enough to send a tremor through my spine. That morning, I made the decision. I was getting out. Screw the data, the funding, the months of planning. Something was wrong here, fundamentally wrong, and no journal or research grant was worth staying another night. I broke down the mic arrays as fast as I could, not even labeling the memory cards, just shoving them into a waterproof pouch. Packed my tent, stowed the panels, left the soil sensors embedded. I'd report them lost. Fine. Let someone else come dig them up. By 10 a.m., I was hiking. Compass in one hand, old-growth map in the other, retracing the markers I'd left on my inbound trek. Bits of colored cords strung around low branches, notched bark, quiet signs. But within the first mile, I noticed something wasn't right. The markers were gone. Not all of them, just some, enough to break the pattern. A segment of red cord missing from the spruce where I'd tied it. A birch with a fresh cut, but not mine. I use a triangular blaze to indicate turns. This one was a smooth vertical slash. Sharp, precise, too clean for a knife. I started second-guessing myself, spinning the compass too fast, trying to match slope lines with my map. But the canopy was thick, the sun dim and colorless, and nothing looked the same. I climbed a small ridge to get my bearings, something I remembered marking on the way in. From up there, I should have been able to spot a break in the tree line to the southwest, the edge of the glacial plateau. But all I saw was more trees, not different ones. The same ones. The maple grove. The same one Mike 3 had faced. I should have been miles from it. I didn't go back down. I didn't move. I just stood there on that ridge and realized the terrain had shifted. Or maybe I had. Maybe had. Either way, I wasn't where I was supposed to be. And then I heard it again, breathing, this time not on tape, not behind me, inside me. At first I thought I was hyperventilating. But no, my breath was steady, controlled, yet underneath it, laced within it, was a second rhythm, one I didn't own. I knelt down, pressed my palms to the mossy ground, and closed my eyes, and I swear to you, I felt it. A low thrum beneath the soil, not seismic, not wind, a pattern. Like sonar, but wrong. Irregular. Testing. My recorder buzzed in my pack. I pulled it out. It had powered on by itself. The display showed a single word. Breathe. All caps. No timestamp. No file. Just a frozen screen and the faint sound of something tapping inside the housing. I dropped it. Not out of fear. Out of instinct. Like holding it any longer would let it finish whatever it had started. I didn't bother with the compass after that. I picked a direction and ran. Hours passed, I think. Time got muddy, my thoughts unraveled in pieces. I remember crossing the same stream twice, once upstream, once downstream, no idea how. I remember hearing voices in the birdsong, my own voice, embedded in the chirps, sleep, listen, stay. I didn't know if I was hallucinating, if I was just lost and exhausted, but the air had changed. It was denser, warmer, like the forest was pressing closer with every step. And then, just as night began to fall, I found the tent. My tent, set up, staked down, gear inside, as if I had never packed it up, as if I had never left. Everything was there. Same sleeping mat, same ration pack, half eaten, recorder on the log where I always kept it. But I wasn't relieved, because there, clipped to the top flap with my metal compass carabiner, was a small piece of birch bark. On it, scrawled in a muddy, trembling hand, were the words, "This is not your first exit." I stood there for a long time, staring, wanting to scream, wanting to run again, but I couldn't, because I knew deep in some part of my brain that I hadn't dared acknowledge before, that something was copying me, not just sounds, not just breath or words, decisions. It knew what I would do, when I would panic, what direction I would run. It was echoing my logic, anticipating it. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't stay in the tent either. I dug a shallow pit 50 yards out, crawled into it with a thermal blanket, and waited with the recorder powered off, the batteries out, and somewhere in the middle of that long and endless night, I heard it walking, not stealthy, not slow, practiced. And when it passed near me, it was breathing, just like me. At first, I thought I was going to vomit. My stomach rolled in on itself, not from sickness, but from the primal realization that I wasn't being hunted in the traditional sense. I was being rehearsed. It was like hearing yourself speak before your mouth opens, like the forest knew my actions a half second before I did. It walked right past me, 6, maybe 7 feet away. I was buried under ferns and pine litter, lips pressed tight against the damp blanket, trying to still my breath until I felt like I was suffocating. It made no effort to mask its sound. Heavy footfalls, dragging slightly, but too even, too measured, like someone walking for the first time after watching a tutorial. And then it stopped, right behind me. It didn't breathe for almost 30 seconds. Neither did I. I counted the beats in my head, the way I'd been trained to when studying slow time behavior in animals, counting muscle twitches in frozen herds, pausing before the kill, but nothing moved. I could hear the ferns settle behind it, a slow tick of moisture off a leaf, then breathe in, my voice, quiet, firm, right next to my ear. I didn't move. I couldn't. My throat locked up. I wanted to cry, but my eyes refused to give it the satisfaction. It didn't say anything else, didn't make a sound, just walked on further into the trees. And I swear on my life, it was walking like I do. Same stride, same pace. The rhythm of my boots on moss replicated beat for beat. I waited until full daylight before I moved. And when I did, I didn't go back for the tent. I didn't check for gear. I didn't touch the recorder. I just started walking again, driven not by bearings, but by a single thought pounding louder than my footsteps. Get out before it learns more. I drank from streams, ate cold rations from my jacket pocket, marked nothing. I didn't want it to know where I'd been. And sometime on the second day, I saw smoke, not fire, just a thin curling stream in the distance, real, tangible. I followed it with a kind of desperation I've never known before. When I reached the source, it was a Park Service crew. 4 people in orange vests doing fire risk monitoring along the outer forest boundary. I stumbled out into their sightline like a ghost. One of them, a guy in his 30s with a forestry badge half hanging off his collar, waved me down. "Whoa, buddy, you all right? You from that climate sound team?" I didn't answer. I just fell to my knees. They gave me water, food, radioed for a ranger unit with medical gear. I was 26 miles from where I'd entered the forest. Somehow I'd crossed ravines I didn't remember, bypassed ridgelines, skirted cliffs. The GPS tracker in my pack had gone silent after day 2. The memory card had been wiped. I told them I'd gotten lost, sleep deprived, nothing else. Because what could I say? That something had copied me? That a voice in the trees whispered in my cadence? That somewhere in the ancient green of that rainforest, something was rehearsing me, like a script? They wouldn't believe me. Hell, I barely believed me. They airlifted me out the next morning. The ranger who debriefed me, older guy, scarred hands, tight-lipped, pulled me aside before I left the station. "You set up near the maple grove?" he asked. I hesitated. "Yeah." He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. We don't like people back in that quadrant. Not even surveyors. It's not on any public trail maps for a reason. I stared at him. Why? He looked me over. Not with pity, not with fear, with something quieter. Resignation. Sometimes folks hear themselves walking when they're standing still, he said. One guy swore the forest was watching him breathe, like it was learning. Nobody's seen him since '96. He clapped a hand on my shoulder and walked off. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want answers. They offered to recover my gear. I said no. Let it rot. Let it become part of the moss and the mulch, and the ancient wet silence that watches from between the trees. I didn't return to the park. I didn't return to fieldwork. I took a job in acoustic data processing, in an office, in a city, the kind of place where the background noise never stops. Traffic, sirens, talking, the white noise of human presence. But sometimes when I'm walking home late, when the streetlights buzz just a little too loud and the night is too still, I stop and hold my breath, and I swear, just for a moment, I can hear myself breathe back. Half a beat behind, just slightly off. And I remember what the recorder said that night. This is not your first exit. God help me if it wasn't. I don't think people really understand what silence means until they've stood at the edge of Crater Lake at midnight. It isn't quiet like a city park in the early morning or the kind of hush you get in a padded room. No, it's something deeper, a silence with weight, with depth, like the lake itself, blue beyond blue in the daytime, blacker than thought once the sun disappears. The first time I heard it, it felt like it was pressing into my eardrums, like it was waiting for me to say something stupid or to listen hard enough to hear what it had to say. The problem was, I did. My name is Tyler. I was 27 that summer, and my girlfriend Jade and I had just finished converting an old 2002 Winnebago into something that actually ran, barely. We'd been living in Portland, going stir-crazy after too many months in a roachy apartment with too little sun and too much screen time. So we hit the road like a lot of couples do. No grand plan, just a map, a fridge full of perishables, and a dog-eared national park guide. Crater Lake was supposed to be a 2-day stop, a high point in the loop. Drive in from the north entrance, camp up near Mazama Village, maybe do the rim drive if the weather held. But Crater Lake has a way of making you stay longer than you plan. The first day was magic. I mean that in the way people say magical, but also in the deeper, truer sense. Like the place wasn't really part of the same world we'd come from. The water was the bluest blue I'd ever seen. Rich, glacial, unreal. At every pull-off, we stood there with our mouths open. We took photos that looked fake even on the screen, like they'd been edited by some cosmic graphic designer. When you stood above it, the caldera cupped that lake like a secret it didn't want to share. And then there was the sound, or the lack of it. The wind whispered sometimes, but nothing echoed. It was like the world around the lake knew to be quiet. By sunset, we'd parked the Winnebago on the far side of the campground. A ranger had told us that spot was usually open, less traffic, closer to the edge, but a little rougher. We didn't care. We were trying to disconnect anyway. No cell service, no neighbors. Just trees, stars, and the massive, ancient silence pressing in around us like a blanket. That night, we grilled burgers, passed around some whiskey, and sat by our little propane fire, watching the stars come out one by one. Jade kept saying how calm it felt, how still. She was sitting with her knees up, hoodie pulled tight, her gaze drifting back toward the direction of the water, even though we couldn't see it from our sight. You ever get the feeling, she said softly, like you're being watched, but not in a creepy way? Just observed? I half laughed. Like God's watching us? No, she said, and her voice got a little distant. Like the lake is watching us. I looked at her for a second, and her eyes were glazed a bit, reflected from the fire. She wasn't joking, I shrugged. It's just big, deep, creepy in a cool way. Yeah, she said, but it glows. I blinked. What? Jay didn't turn. She just nodded toward the darkness. I swear when we were driving in right before sunset, I saw it, like there was light under the surface. pale green, kind of pulsing. I sat back and took another drink. You probably saw a reflection, moonrise or something. No moon yet, she said without hesitation. It wasn't above the ridge. I checked. We didn't say much after that. Went to bed a little buzzed. I figured she was just letting the mystery of the place get into her head. I kind of liked that about her, to be honest. Jade was always tuned into things I wasn't. She'd tell me when a room felt off before a fight broke out. She'd stop walking suddenly and point out a hawk gliding silently overhead I never would have noticed. I liked that she was paying attention. I just didn't think this time it would turn into something that paid attention back. Around 3:12 a.m., I checked the stove clock when I woke up. I felt cold, not just a little chilly. Cold in my ribs under the sleeping bag, like the warmth had been sucked out of the air inside the RV. I blinked and looked over. Jade was still asleep, curled tight, hoodie over her face. I sat up and listened. Silence, but not the same silence. This one had a tone, an edge, like the silence after something loud had just stopped. Then I noticed the faintest glow bleeding through the cracked blinds of the rear window. Pale green. My feet were moving before my brain had caught up. I don't know what I thought I'd find. Maybe campers with flashlights, maybe a ranger truck. But I slipped on my boots, pulled on a flannel, and stepped outside. The night hit me like a slab of black velvet. Stars up above in a dizzying swirl. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. I walked quietly around the RV, feeling the pine needles crackle beneath my soles. When I reached the clearing between our site and the trail, I stopped. There it was. Just past the tree line, between the trunks and low brush, I could see it through the gaps. The lake. Not directly, but just enough of a sliver to catch the water's edge. And it was glowing. Soft. Iridescent. Like something alive was shifting under the surface, casting pale light upward. Not static either. It shimmered in waves like breath, like bioluminescence from something dreaming below. I don't know how long I stood there, staring. The longer I looked, the less I could move. Something about it pulled at me, not like gravity, more like memory, like the feeling when you almost remember a dream you had as a child, but it slips back down into sleep. And then I heard the stars. I know how that sounds, but I swear, above me, beyond the black sky, something started humming. Not loud, not melodic, just a vibration, like a chorus on the edge of thought, like the sky itself was singing, but only in grief. My head started to ache. I dropped to one knee, and I swear I saw it. The center of the lake rippled outward, a perfect slow circle. Then another. Then, beneath that pale green shimmer, something darker bloomed, like a pupil, like the lake opened its eye, and it saw me. It saw me. The moment the pupil opened, if that's even what it was, I felt something slide inside my thoughts, like a key turning in a lock I didn't know existed. The glow intensified just enough to illuminate the rim of the caldera through the gaps in the trees. Everything sharpened, the scent of pine, the cold of the air, the blood rushing in my ears. I blinked hard. Once, twice. The glow vanished. Just like that, it was gone. No more ripples, no more pupil, just the night, just silence. I didn't remember going back to bed. I didn't remember anything after that. 1 second, I was kneeling at the edge of the trees, eyes wide open. The next, it was morning, and Jade was making coffee in the kitchenette, humming to herself like it was any other morning on the road. "You okay?" she asked, not looking up from the mug. "You look pale." I stared at the dark liquid swirling in her hand like it might hold an answer. "Bad dreams," I muttered. "Did you wake up at all? Hear anything?" She shook her head. "Slept hard, like the dead kind of hard." I nodded, rubbing my face. My skin felt tight and cold even in the sunlight. "I think I walked out for a minute. I thought I saw." She waited, but I couldn't say it. Couldn't bring myself to tell her what I thought I saw, that something in the lake had looked back at me. That it hadn't been just a feeling, that it had shape, intelligence, depth. I left it alone. We made breakfast, cleaned up camp, and tried to move on. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I blinked, I saw it, that faint ring of green glow, the slow, expanding ripples, the darkness beneath. that eye, that awareness. Later that afternoon, we hiked up Watchman Peak, figuring the elevation would give us a clearer view of the lake. I didn't mention my real reason for wanting to go. I just told Jade the views were supposed to be incredible, which they were. But that wasn't why I kept staring. I needed to see if it was still glowing. The hike wasn't long, maybe a mile and a half, but it gained elevation fast. By the time we hit the lookout, I was drenched in sweat, heart pounding harder than the trail warranted. Not from exertion, from dread, from knowing that I might look down and see the lake staring back. But when we reached the top, the view was clean, blue, pure, like nothing had ever disturbed it. Sunlight reflected off the still water like polished glass, casting sharp shadows along the caldera wall. A few patches of snow still clung to the shaded cliffs despite the season. Jade stood quietly beside me, soaking it all in, but I was waiting for the sun to dip, waiting for night. We lingered too long, missed our chance to hike back before dark. The shadows stretched earlier than expected, long and quick. Crater Lake seemed to eat light faster than it should. By the time we were halfway down, that blue water had turned black again, and there it was. Just a flicker at first, but unmistakable, a faint shimmer. Green, like deep-sea algae, breathing, just beneath the surface. I stopped in my tracks. "Do you see that?" I asked. Jade didn't speak. Her eyes were fixed on the lake. A breeze moved through the trees. The wind felt wet, like something exhaled out of the crater. It smelled like moss and something deeper, something metallic like blood or old coins. I could taste it on my tongue, sharp and cold. Jade turned to me slowly. "I don't want to go back to the RV." Her voice was tight, barely above a whisper. "Why?" I asked, even though I already knew. My gut knew. She swallowed. "I had a dream last night. It wasn't just sleep. I saw stars. But they weren't stars. They were screaming, like all at once. And the lake opened," I said. She stared at me. And I knew then that whatever this was, it hadn't just picked me. It had found her too. We walked the rest of the way back in silence, flashlights bobbing in the dark. Every rustle in the brush made me flinch. The shadows between the trees felt thicker than they should have been, like they were moving just slightly when we weren't looking. The Winnebago looked normal when we got back, parked right where we left it. Windows fogged from the inside, lights still off, but I couldn't shake the sense that something had been inside it while we were gone. I opened the door slowly. The interior was quiet, cold again. Freezing, actually, even though the outside air was mild. Jade stepped in behind me and wrapped her arms around herself instinctively. "Smell that?" she whispered. It hit me all at once. Salt. Not like ocean salt. Not fresh or breezy. This was old, briny, heavy, like the inside of a crypt filled with seawater. And beneath it, just barely, came something like sulfur, like wet rocks broken open. Neither of us said anything after that. We didn't need to. Something had come in. Something had left a piece of itself behind. We slept badly, restless, tossing. Every time I drifted off, I'd jolt awake, gasping like I'd been underwater too long. The dreams came back, clearer this time. The sky split open like skin, stars pouring out like sparks from a welding torch, screaming in a language I didn't recognize but understood. The lake below churned like a great, slow eye-opening again. And always, always, that sensation that I was being seen. Not as a man, as prey. I didn't tell Jade about the dreams. She didn't tell me hers, but we both knew. The next morning, we didn't speak as we packed. No drawn-out breakfast, no slow sipping coffee by the fire pit. We wanted out. But when I turned the key in the ignition, nothing happened. Dead. Not even a click. I checked the battery. No corrosion, no loose wires. Nothing wrong. It just wouldn't start. We sat there for a moment, still in our seats, staring through the windshield at the trailhead beyond. And then, for just one instant, the rearview mirror shimmered. Just a flicker, a ripple of green light behind us. I turned. Nothing there. But somehow I knew that it had moved closer. Jade didn't say a word. She just stood up, grabbed her pack, and walked out the RV door like we both knew it wasn't safe to be inside anymore. And I followed. Because what else do you do when something unseen is growing heavier in the air, thick as oil, dense enough to make your breath catch in your throat. The forest was quiet, too quiet, like everything that chirped or rustled or howled had already fled or was hiding. We followed the path toward the ranger station. It was a few miles off, past the campground loop, and across a small service road. I thought maybe we could call for a tow, maybe get a ranger to help jump the battery. That was the logical part of my brain, still trying to keep control, still rationalizing. But deep down, I already knew. No ranger was going to help us. No tow truck was going to make it in. Not in time, not before it decided to finish what it started. We were halfway down the service trail when the wind stopped completely. No breeze, no movement in the trees, no sway in the tall grass, just dead air. Jade gripped my arm. "Listen," she said, and I did. At first, I thought I heard wind again, a soft, low whoosh coming from every direction at once. But it wasn't wind. It was breathing. A low, slow inhale that filled the forest like a bellows, followed by a stillness so complete it made the hair on my neck stand up. And then the whispering started. Not voices, not words, more like thoughts that didn't belong to me, dripping into my mind like cold water. "We see you. We know your shape. You came to the rim. You looked into the eye." Jade froze beside me. I didn't need to ask if she heard it too. Her eyes were wide, locked on something just past the trees, and her lips moving slightly like she was trying to answer without sound. I grabbed her hand, pulled her down the path fast. No more slow walking, no more listening. We ran. Branches whipped at our faces, roots caught our feet, but we didn't stop, we didn't look back. And still I felt it. Watching. Pressing. Like a pressure behind my eyes, like if I turned around I'd see something waiting just inches from my neck. By the time we reached the ranger station clearing, my lungs were burning, my legs shaking. The building was dark, no truck, no lights. The door was locked. I pounded on it anyway. "Hello?" I shouted. "Is anyone?" And then I saw it. Just inside the window, half lit by the pale morning light, a coffee cup on the floor, shattered. Papers scattered across the desk. A ranger hat sitting on the chair like someone had set it down mid-conversation, but no ranger. I tried the knob again. Locked. I looked around for anything, rocks, tools, even a spare key box. Nothing. Jade's breath was ragged. Her face was pale. She wasn't looking at the station anymore. She was staring back toward the woods. "They're coming," she said. And then, without warning, a sound pierced the air like metal being torn in half. A keening cry that rose from the direction of the lake, high-pitched, animal and human all at once. A sound that should not exist. Jade dropped to her knees, hands over her ears. I crouched next to her, heart hammering. The sound seemed to go on forever, and when it stopped, the forest exhaled, and the whispering came back. "Return. Return to the water. You are remembered." I don't know what that meant. I didn't want to know. We had to get out. That was all I knew. Even if the RV wouldn't start, even if we had to hike out of the park and hitchhike down Highway 62, we couldn't stay. I helped Jade to her feet. We started back toward camp, not because we wanted to go near the lake again, but because everything else was worse. And that's when the forest changed. It sounds insane, I know, but I swear it. The path we had just run down was different. The trees weren't in the same places. The underbrush was wrong. The landmarks, the twisted stump we passed, the split boulder, they weren't there. Instead, the trail looped tighter, narrower, like a funnel pulling us inward, toward the lake. I stopped. This wasn't here before. Jade was already shaking her head. "No, this is wrong. It's leading us back." I turned in a full circle, trying to reorient, trying to find anything familiar. But everything looked the same, like the forest had reshaped itself when we weren't looking, like it wanted us lost. I pulled out my compass. Useless. The needle spun in slow, lazy circles. I held up my phone. No bars, battery draining faster than it should. "Ty," Jade whispered. I turned. There, between the trees, a figure. Not close, not far, just standing, in the direction of the lake. Its proportions were wrong, too tall, too thin. Its limbs bent like they didn't quite understand how joints were supposed to work. And its skin, if that's what it was, shimmered green in the dappled shadows. No face, just the suggestion of one. like staring at a mask underwater. And when it tilted its head slightly, the forest around us seemed to tilt with it. Jade grabbed my wrist. Run. We ran again, but this time there was no direction, no trail, just trees and panic and the certainty that something not human was behind us. I didn't know how long we ran. Minutes, hours. Time didn't move normally there. Eventually, we stumbled out of the woods, back onto the campsite loop road. We'd come out near the amphitheater, maybe half a mile from our RV. We didn't stop, just kept going. By the time we reached the Winnebago again, the sun was sinking. The lake glowed brighter than ever, and as we reached the door, we saw it, a trail of wet footprints leading out of the trees, up to the door, and inside. I stood frozen at the foot of the RV stairs, staring at those footprints, bare, human-shaped, each one wet and glistening against the dirt and pine needles, the edges of them already drying in the late sun. But they weren't ours. We had worn boots, and neither of us had been wet. Jade stepped closer to me, her voice low and tight. If it's still inside. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I pressed my ear to the RV door, listened. Nothing. Not even the usual faint creak of the old fridge or the shifting of the overhead storage. Just that awful bloated silence again, like sound had curled up and died in there. I opened the door slowly, the hinges groaning. The light was dim, shadows stretched unnaturally long across the floor, like they'd been painted on with a heavier hand than usual. And the air, God, the air was wet, clammy and thick like sea fog, the kind that clings to your lungs and makes you cough without knowing why. Jade stayed at the bottom step while I went in. Everything looked untouched. Everything but one thing. On the dinette table in the exact center was a puddle, small, glistening, like someone had stood over it, dripping. And beside the puddle, pressed neatly into the wood grain was a smudge, a print. Finger-shaped but long, too long, like someone had traced an idea of a hand but forgotten what human fingers looked like. I backed out slowly, closed the door behind me, looked at Jade. We're not staying another night. Her eyes were glassy. We won't make it through another. We didn't even argue. We packed only what we could carry. Essentials, water, warm clothes, a flashlight each, a folding knife I kept in the glove box. Everything else stayed. We started down the road, headed away from the lake toward the distant highway, and for a while it felt like we might make it. Until the stars came out again. They didn't twinkle like they should have, didn't glow like safe, familiar points of light. They pulsed, and I could feel them again, screaming, not with sound, with presence, a pressure behind my eyes, like my skull was being flexed from the inside, like my thoughts weren't mine anymore. Jade dropped her pack, fell to her knees, hands over her face. They're looking through us, she gasped. Not at us, through. I knelt next to her, held her shoulder. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Don't look up, I whispered. Don't give it a window. She clamped her eyes shut, rocking back and forth. I saw it in my dream again. The lake opened, and inside it was me, but broken, shattered, floating like ash in water. The trail behind us glowed faintly, green. I looked back and felt it, that pull again, the draw of the eye. The lake wanted us back, and worse, it remembered us, not as visitors, as part of something. I don't know how long we crouched there, breathing in dirt and cold air and that strange, briny smell that had no business being this far from water. But eventually a sound broke through it, a real sound, engine noise, faint, but real. I jumped up and waved my flashlight like a madman, screaming into the dark. And then it came into view. Headlights bouncing along the road, a park maintenance truck moving slow, casual. The driver stopped when he saw us, window already halfway down. "What the hell are you two doing out here?" he asked. His voice was gravelly, like someone who'd spent too many winters splitting wood. I ran up, nearly collapsed against the hood. "Please, we need a ride out. Something's wrong. Something in the lake." The man held up a hand, eyes narrowing. "Where were you camped?" "Mazama," I said. "Back edge of the loop, near the trail to Watchman." He studied me, then Jade. "You two stare too long?" My blood ran cold. He knew. "What does that mean?" Jade whispered, stepping up beside me. The man didn't answer right away, just motioned us into the back seat with a sigh like he'd seen this before. Once we were inside, he locked the doors and drove. Didn't say a word for the first mile, just stared straight ahead, one hand on the wheel like the other resting on a baseball cap that sat on the dash. The cap had a Ranger's insignia stitched onto it, faded and torn. Finally, he said, "Crater Lake's not what people think. It's not just deep, it's hollow." Jade looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means you don't look too long, you don't stay too close, and you sure as hell don't listen when it calls." The silence returned after that, but it felt different in the cab. Warmer, safer somehow, like the eye couldn't reach in here. Not yet. He dropped us off at a service area outside the park, didn't give his name, just told us to leave Oregon and not come back. And we did. For weeks, we didn't talk about it. We avoided lakes, forests, stars. Every night, I still heard them in my sleep. The way the sky sounded, the way the water looked back. I stopped dreaming like a person. My dreams weren't in language anymore, just colors, movements, cold pulses of thought. Jade stopped sleeping altogether for a while. And one night, while brushing her teeth, she turned off the faucet and leaned into the mirror with wide, horrified eyes. She told me afterwards she thought she saw the pupil open again, not in the lake. In her own eyes. She told me she blinked hard, leaned in, even tapped the glass, but it was gone. Just her reflection. Just tired eyes rimmed with sleepless nights and things we still weren't talking about. But I believed her, because I'd seen something too. That same morning, I woke with a pressure behind my eyelids. Not pain. Weight. Like something had pooled behind them overnight. When I looked in the mirror, my eyes were bloodshot, yeah. But more than that, I saw it. Just for a second. The iris of my right eye didn't look right. The color was off. Murkier. And for one instant, as the bathroom light flickered, it shimmered green. I didn't tell Jade. I didn't want to add more to what she was already carrying. But the more we tried to leave that place behind, the more I felt it still inside us. A month passed. We moved the RV east, all the way to Idaho, then Wyoming. I thought if we put enough miles between us and that crater, maybe it would fade. Maybe whatever had watched us would forget. But Crater Lake doesn't forget. One night, while camped outside Lander near a hot spring, Jade shook me awake just past midnight. Her face was slick with sweat despite the cold air. "I saw it again," she whispered. "Not in a dream. I was awake. I got up to pee and it was in the steam. Floating, staring. I sat up fast, scanning the windows. Just pine shadows, a distant outline of the hills. Nothing obvious, but the RV creaked, slow and deliberate, like something was adjusting its weight on the roof. Then another creak, then stillness. I grabbed the knife from beneath the sink, slowly cracked the door open. The cold bit instantly into my skin. I stepped outside, nothing on the roof. No footprints in the dirt, just silence. But the stars above, those goddamn stars, pulsed again. Soft green light, like distant fireflies blinking in unison. I stared, caught off guard by how beautiful it looked. And then I felt it return. The gaze. Not behind me, inside me, like my own mind had opened a door and something from that lake had never quite left. It just waited. Let me forget long enough to think I was safe, until I wasn't. That night, I finally told Jade everything. The eye I thought I saw in the mirror, the pressure, the dreams that had started whispering in words I didn't understand, but somehow knew were true. We sat on the floor of the RV and held each other like two people trying not to drift into something bigger than themselves. Something vast. "I don't think it was just the lake," she said finally. "It felt older than that. Older than anything, like the water's just a door." I nodded, and we left it open. We made a decision that night. A desperate one, maybe, but what else do you do when you feel like something ancient is still staring at the back of your skull? We were going back, not to camp, not to hike, but to close it, whatever that meant. Even if we had to burn the RV where it sat, even if it meant stepping back to the rim and letting it see us one more time. We drove through 3 states like fugitives. Barely slept, ate from gas stations, didn't stop longer than necessary. Something in the air grew heavier the closer we got to Oregon. And when we passed the sign for Crater Lake National Park again, something strange happened. The sky went quiet. I don't mean sound, I mean emotionally quiet. Like the stars blinked and pulled back, like they'd been watching us too, but were now waiting to see what we'd do. We reached the entrance after dusk. No rangers, no cars, just a single crow sitting on the booth roof, watching us with one milky eye. The road in was lined with fog, thick, churning even though wind moved. As we drove, the forest grew denser. Trees leaned over the road like they were listening. And when we reached the overlook, the first place we'd stood that first day, we parked, didn't speak, just stood there and looked. The lake was still, but it wasn't calm. It glowed softly beneath the surface, that same green shimmer, breathing. And then, slowly, inevitably, it began to ripple again, gentle circles expanding from the center, and the pupil opened. Black, immense, endless. Jade gripped my hand. "Don't blink," she said. And we didn't. We stared straight into it, into that vastness that lived under the lake, behind the dreams, inside the stars. I felt it push into me, into every nerve and cell. It knew me. Not just as Tyler, not just this body, but everything. My fears, my memories. The time I nearly drowned as a kid and heard something speak in the water. I felt Jade stiffen beside me. She was crying but didn't look away. And in that moment, I understood. The lake didn't take people. It remembered them. It collected pieces, glances, attention, like offerings, like we had worshipped without knowing it, and now it was reaching out to return the gaze. Jade whispered something then. A sound. A word I didn't know but somehow felt through my teeth. The glow intensified. The ripples grew faster, but we didn't run. We stood. And then, like a shutter snapping closed, the pupil vanished. The lake went still. Dead still. And the glow stopped. We didn't speak as we walked back to the RV. We didn't need to. The gaze had passed. The door maybe had closed. But I'll tell you the truth. Some nights when I blink too long, I still feel it open. Not out there, in me. After that night, we left Oregon for good. No more back roads, no more national parks, no more nights spent on the edge of something we didn't understand. We stuck to open spaces, deserts, flatlands, long highways with nowhere to hide. Not because we were afraid of nature anymore, but because we knew what could wear nature like a mask. We sold the Winnebago in Colorado, just left it behind in a dusty lot and handed over the keys to a man who didn't ask questions. We didn't want to pass it on like some cursed relic, but we couldn't bear to sleep in it another night. It still held the smell, that faint, wet saltwater scent that no scrub or bleach could touch, like something had soaked into the walls. Jade started keeping a journal. She didn't let me read it at first, but sometimes when she fell asleep on the motel bed beside me, I'd glance over. The entries weren't always in English. Some weren't in any language I recognized, just strings of symbols, curves and slashes that looked almost like water patterns frozen mid-motion, like someone had written down the reflections off the lake's surface, over and over again. She never remembered writing them. One day, I asked her about the word she spoke that night, the one she whispered at the lake, the one that made the pupil blink shut. She thought about it, then shook her head. I didn't say anything, but I remember it clear as my own heartbeat, a word I can still hear echoing in my skull when I'm just on the edge of sleep. We tried to rebuild a life in small towns, in dry states, places with no lakes, no deep water, but the dreams never left, not entirely, and sometimes it wasn't dreams. I'd be in a grocery store reaching for a can of soup and the lights would flicker, and every label would shimmer green for a second. Just a flash. Gone the moment I blinked. I'd be driving alone on a straight highway, no turnoffs for 50 miles, and I'd look in the rearview mirror and swear the trees behind me weren't there a second ago. Jade started hearing things through faucets, whispering under the shower. The sound of breath that wasn't hers when she turned off the tap. We never talked about it in public, never even whispered it between ourselves anymore. It became the unspoken wall in the room, heavy and sacred and wrong. But the moment it came back, we both knew. It happened in Utah. We were renting a studio apartment above an old mechanic shop. No lakes nearby, no rivers, but we should have known. Water doesn't need a map. That night, it rained. First time in 6 months. And with the rain, the dreams again. Louder this time. More vivid. But not just of the lake, of what lived beneath it. I saw it clearly now. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't even a being in the way we understand. It was a tension, a pressure, an ancient hunger that reached through reflections and thoughts and bloodlines, something that watched the world from behind the veil of still water, waiting for people dumb enough to stare long enough for it to see them back. It didn't live in Crater Lake. It was anchored there, but it stretched far, and now, because of us, it was stretching farther. That morning, I found water pooled in the middle of our kitchen floor. No leaks, no spills, just a perfect circle of cold, glistening water with a footprint in it. Too long, too thin, like someone had stepped out of the floor and stood there, watching us sleep. Jade sat at the table, her journal open, pen in hand. She didn't look at me. "They're awake now," she said. I nodded. I didn't need to ask who. We moved again, packed what little we had, and drove until the tires begged for rest. But it didn't help. You can't outrun something that lives in the places your mind refuses to believe exist. You can't hide from a lake that remembers you, that sees you still. And the worst part, I understand now. It wasn't punishing us. It wasn't angry. It was inviting us back to be part of whatever it was, a new pupil in its widening eye, a voice in its growing song. I believe that's what the glow is. Not light, memory, like sonar, bouncing out, reflecting inward, remembering everything that's ever looked into it and offering something in return. Not death, rewriting. Jade changed first. She stopped sleeping altogether, stopped eating much. Her pupils looked different, wider, like they couldn't constrict anymore. Her skin always felt slightly damp, even in dry air. And sometimes when she thought I wasn't watching, she'd whisper to herself in that same strange language. One night, she got out of bed and walked outside barefoot. I followed, but I didn't stop her. She walked into the rain, just stood there, arms raised, face tilted upward, mouth open, like she was drinking in the storm. I don't know how long she stood there, but when she came back in, she didn't say a word, just crawled back into bed, dripping, and slept for the first time in days. I lay next to her, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, listening, and I heard it, not whispering this time, not words, just breath, slow, immense, filling the world, filling me. And then something clicked. Somehow this wasn't an ending. This was a choice. We'd seen it, and we hadn't run far enough. We'd opened the door, and now we could either shut it forever and be haunted by what we'd seen, or walk through it, accept the invitation, and join it. I'm not saying we're going back to Crater Lake. I'm saying we never left. Not really. And if you're hearing this, if you ever go there, if you ever stand on the rim and feel that silence pressing in and the glow beneath the surface calls to you, don't look. Not too long, because once it sees you, you can't unsee it. And it won't forget. Not now, not ever. Because the eye that opens in Crater Lake stays open. There's no shade out there, just heat pressing from all directions like the lid of a furnace. No wind, no water. You think you've packed enough, but you haven't. Not really. Not when the silence starts to swell. I was doing my thesis work in one of the most remote parts of southern Utah, a stretch of unregulated BLM land that only cattlemen, climbers, and rock freaks like me bother with. My advisor told me to map the uplift patterns along a dry fault line that cuts straight through Navajo sandstone. Sounds dull, but the folding was strange. Tight, almost like a fingerprint, and there were rumors from earlier surveys of magnetics misbehaving. The area had a reputation, though nothing you'd call credible. Just ranger chatter. Broken compasses. Old boots found full of sand, no bodies. You hear that kind of thing a lot. I didn't pay attention to any of it. I parked my truck near a cattle gate, marked the GPS pin, packed in 6 liters of water, a radio, a field book, audio log mic, and a thermal shirt for later. The hike was only supposed to take a couple of hours, in and out. But when I came back, every clock I owned told me I'd only been gone 20 minutes. Only my body said otherwise. Sunburn down my neck and arms, lips split, dirt baked into every pore. I smelled like I hadn't showered in a week, my water was gone. My boots were worn in ways they hadn't been that morning, scuffed at the heel like I'd been dragging them. But the real terror didn't set in until that night when I started reviewing the field logs. And I heard myself breathing, but not from the recording. It came through my headphones, slightly delayed, ragged, wrong, like a copy that had forgotten how to inhale. I thought maybe I'd left a channel open, some live mic, but I didn't own any equipment that could pick up live sound from the field once I was back at camp. That's when I started to think something had followed me home. I've tried to backtrack this moment in my head hundreds of times. It started on the trail, early afternoon, the sun high. I was tracing the ridge above a dry wash where the sandstone domes rise like frozen waves. This place doesn't feel real. It's all burnt orange and pinks, and the wind cuts shapes in the stone that look like people bent in prayer. You sweat fast, but it doesn't linger. It just disappears into the air. And after a while, so do your thoughts. I'd stopped to check my compass because something felt off. My watch was reading 2:43 p.m. My shadow looked wrong, elongated, too sharp for that hour. It flickered, just for a second, like heat mirage, and then it was back to normal. I thought I was dehydrated, so I sat down under the overhang of a hollowed boulder, took a sip from my pack, and turned on the mic to record a short log. That part's still there, clear as day. Field log, 14:43 hours. Wind negligible. No visible wildlife. Sandstone fold continuing at a sharper angle than predicted, possibly due to subduction far earlier than initial uplift models suggest. We'll attempt to reach the saddle and triangulate from there. Then I turned it off, and I blinked. When I opened my eyes, the sky had changed. The color was the same, that pale, empty blue, but the light was wrong. Dimmer, like the sun had passed behind some filter I couldn't see, and it was silent. Not just quiet, but dead. No wind, no flies, not even the crunch of sand beneath my boots. I stood up and felt a pressure in my ears, like descending in an airplane. My skin itched, my water tasted metallic, but I kept walking, because that's what you do when you're alone out there. You rationalize, maybe a cloud passed, maybe I zoned out, maybe I was more tired than I thought, but then I looked at my watch again. Only it felt like hours had passed. The sun was now hanging lower, my stomach was growling, my face was tight with heat exposure, my skin hurt. I checked my GPS, no signal, compass, spinning, literally spinning like it was caught in a drain. That's when I realized I'd walked far beyond the fold I meant to map. The landscape was unfamiliar. The domes were taller, redder. They stood like sentinels around a flat basin, littered with shattered rock. There were no footprints, no animal tracks, just concentric rings in the sand. Wide, spiraling lines like something had swept through it in perfect circles, too clean to be erosion. I told myself it was a dust devil, a wind pattern, but the air hadn't moved in hours. I tried to call out. My voice died after 2 words, swallowed by the heat. That was the first time I thought, I shouldn't be here. I turned back, or tried to, but the ridgeline I'd come down was gone. In its place was another dome, almost identical, but I swear it wasn't there before. I'm a geologist. I memorize rock, pattern, fracture. None of this looked familiar. I started to climb anyway, desperate for elevation. Every few minutes, I marked a point in my notebook. I even scratched my initials into a rock ledge just to prove to myself I existed. When I reached the top, I saw the same basin I'd just left, only I hadn't turned in a circle. The sun was lower now, almost at the rim of the horizon. It cast long shadows between the rocks, and for the first time I saw movement, but not animals. Shadows that twitched when I didn't, bent at the wrong angle. Some darted behind formations before I could catch them full on. Always just outside my peripheral vision. My body was starting to shut down, cramped, my lips were bleeding. Every breath I took sounded louder in my own head, as if something was mimicking it a split second behind me. At one point, I thought I saw another hiker, just for a heartbeat. A blue hoodie, half visible between two sandstone spires. I shouted. No answer. I ran toward it and found nothing. No boot prints. No person. Just a strip of sun-bleached blue fabric wedged under a rock. When I pulled it out, the smell hit me, acrid, like ozone and sweat and something sour. It was old, but not weathered, preserved, too clean, and inside the seam someone had scrawled a name I couldn't make out. It ended in inch. Could have been Min, my name, but I never wore anything like that. When I finally made it back to my truck, or what I thought was my truck, the sun was high again. It was as if the light had reset. I stepped out of the wash and saw my white Tacoma sitting exactly where I left it, dustless, clean, like no time had passed. My phone had full bars. I looked at the dashboard clock, 3:03 p.m., only 20 minutes since my last voice log. But my body didn't match. I'd lost weight. My shirt was crusted in sweat. My water was gone. I thought maybe I had heat stroke. Maybe I imagined it. Then I found my field notebook in my pocket. Pages of entries I didn't remember writing. None in my handwriting, just line after line of coordinates drawn, spiraling inward like a whirlpool. And then this sentence repeated 6 times. The sun resets when you look away. I didn't sleep that night. Back at camp, I paced for hours. I stripped out of my gear, took a cold shower, scrubbed my arms raw just to feel something normal. The pain helped, but I couldn't make sense of the time discrepancy. I checked the field logs again. The voice recording, the one I remembered starting under that boulder, was only 34 seconds long. There were no other files, no ambient pickups, no extended logs. I called my advisor. He laughed, said, "You probably just got turned around. Heat does that." But heat doesn't write coordinates you don't recognize in your own field book. It doesn't eat 3 days off your bones. I uploaded the log file into my laptop to listen again, to reassure myself it wasn't corrupt. That's when I heard the breathing. At first I thought it was mine, but it didn't sync. It lagged. It mirrored me, but slightly off. I'd inhale, it would inhale, I'd exhale, and a second later, so would it. I scrubbed through the audio, no signal bleed, no background interference. I isolated the breathing, ran a frequency match. Not a match, my own breathing was one waveform. The other, slower, rougher, slightly higher, belonged to someone else. But that wasn't the worst part. I looped the 2 samples back to back, listened again, and in one iteration, just for a moment, the second voice whispered something between breaths. Not in English, something fractured. Clicks and pops where consonants should be, like language evolved in a pressure cave. I cut the volume, sat in the dark with my head in my hands for a long time, and then I checked the metadata of the audio file. Date created July 14th, 3:02 p.m. Date modified July 2:56 p.m. 3 days. Even the file remembered. The next day I went back. I had to. That's what they don't tell you about fear. It doesn't always make you run. Sometimes it drives you right back toward the thing that broke you, because what if it happens again and you miss the one chance to understand it? This time I brought everything. Extra GPS units, motion camera, EMF scanner borrowed from a friend in anthropology who runs mock ghost hunts for incoming freshmen. I even strapped a secondary audio recorder to my wrist with duct tape. And I marked a trail, every 15 feet, bright orange flags. So no matter what, I'd have a breadcrumb path. The area looked exactly the same, but I didn't feel it. It felt aware. That's not a word I use lightly. I'm a scientist, or at least I was. But when I stepped into the canyon mouth, I felt watched. Not in a paranoid way, not like a mountain lion or a drone overhead. This was intimate, like something already knew my weight, my sweat composition, the rhythm of my thoughts. The air tasted wrong again. Tinny, still. I took readings. Atmospheric pressure, normal. Radiation, slightly elevated but within background range for desert granite. EMF, flatline. Then my secondary audio recorder chirped. Recording, on. It clicked to life even though I hadn't touched it. The screen flashed once, then died. My body was already sweating, my hands were shaking, but I kept moving. I reached the same outcrop, the hollow boulder, sat underneath it again, looked around. No movement. Then I checked the rock where I'd scratched my initials 3 days earlier. They were still there. Only now there were 3 more sets. Same initials, same MD. I thought, maybe someone else? But no. They were stacked, carved below the first, like someone, me, had come back and etched them again. Different days, different depths, same hand. I started to panic. My head felt loose, like a dream. I looked up and I saw him, just across the basin. Standing dead still on a sandstone ledge, he was wearing my field shirt, my boots. Even from this distance, I knew. Because his face, it was mine. Or almost, like a copy made from memory. The chin was too sharp, the eyebrows too clean, the expression wrong. He didn't move, not until I raised my arm to wave. Then he did the same. A moment after me, delayed. Just like the breathing, and he never blinked. I don't know how long I stood there. Eventually, I ran. My legs didn't feel like mine. I tore through the wash, flags be damned. I don't remember climbing the ridge. I don't remember getting back to the truck, but I do remember looking in the side mirror and seeing no reflection. Not that mine was missing, but that someone else's face was looking out, the same almost mine face, smiling, like he was relieved. That was a month ago. I've tried to explain, show the data, play the audio, but the second breathing track is gone now. And the metadata has reset. My field book, water damaged. Pages fused together like it spent a week at the bottom of a reservoir. But my body remembers. My skin still burns under artificial light, official light. My sleep cycle is broken. I wake up every night at 2:44 a.m. exactly. Every clock, every device, same minute, and I hear breathing outside the window. A second behind my own. And sometimes it exhales first. I stopped using mirrors. Not out of superstition, not at first. It was practical. After that day in the desert, I couldn't look at my own face without seeing the version of me I saw on the ledge. That expression, hollow, exact, rehearsed. It followed me into reflective surfaces, into my dreams, into the flat, silent hum of fluorescent lights in university labs. I started noticing it in other ways too. People at the geology department stopped talking when I entered the room. Professors smiled too wide, too forced. One TA said, "You were in my lecture last week," and I hadn't been. I checked the recording. There I was. Second row. Not blinking. Not moving. Just sitting, watching the door. When I confronted her about it, she looked pale and mumbled something about glitching video frames. But the file was fine, the resolution clean, and the thing wearing my face turned just slightly toward the camera and smiled. The same smile. That relieved, possessive smile, like it finally belonged. I tried going back to my advisor one last time, told him I thought I was losing time, maybe sleep deprivation, maybe I'd experienced some desert psychosis. He looked up from his screen and frowned. "I thought we already talked about this yesterday," he said. "You seemed fine then." I hadn't been in his office for over a week, but he pulled up his calendar and showed me. Emden, 11 a.m. check-in. There it was. I asked what we talked about. He didn't remember. Just that I seemed quiet. I left the program 3 days later, packed up my shared apartment, moved into my car, parked out near the southern edge of the same BLM land where it all started. I didn't know why. It felt like a compulsion, like the only way I could pull the thread without it tearing everything else apart. I camped near the wash, but didn't hike in. Not this time. I just watched, waited, and that's when I started noticing the patterns. Same clouds each morning, drifting the same path. Same hawk, same shadow, over and over. I placed rocks in a circle, disturbed the sand, came back the next morning, undisturbed. Not reset, but looped. Then I left a camera rolling overnight, a motion sensor. What I captured shouldn't be possible. At 2:44 a.m., the screen flickers. Something enters the frame. A silhouette with my gait, my posture, but off. Its arms hang too low. It walks like it's pretending to understand movement, and when it turns its head toward the lens, it doesn't stop. The head keeps turning, too far, until the chin is at the spine. and then it smiles. I sent that footage to a friend who works in visual effects. She called me in the middle of the night. You did this with After Effects, right? No, I said. That's from a static motion camera out in Utah. She went silent. Min, she said. This isn't a render. It's baked into the frame data, like it's part of the codec. You didn't record this. It was already there. I asked her to delete it. She said she already tried. The file won't erase. It just copies. Everywhere. That's when I stopped trying to explain. The desert gave me something or took something. I can't tell which. I don't think it matters anymore. But I do know this. Every place I've gone since then, I've seen myself. Out the window of passing cars, reflected in cafe glass, standing in crowds where I never stood, always facing me, always just behind. There are scratches now on the inside of my apartment window, 4 vertical lines, parallel, deep, like someone was trying to draw something, or maybe counting. And just this morning, when I checked the mirror, not on purpose, just a passing glance, I saw something behind my shoulder. Not in the room, in the reflection. A sandstone basin, my own hand raised in a wave. And behind that, a spiral. A perfect spiral drawn in the sand. I haven't told anyone else, no one would believe me. But I think you might. Because if you've ever been out there, deep in the red stone where the wind stops and the heat forgets to leave, maybe you've felt it too. That pull, that echo. Like the land remembers your shape and waits for you to leave a hole behind. So some nights, I dream of a second sun. Pale, cold, hanging just above the real one. And in the dream, I wake up back in the wash. My watch reads 2:44 and my voice whispers behind me, you blinked. And then everything resets. I never used to believe that land could remember things. Not just footprints or old fire pits or rusted trailer hitches left behind. I mean, feelings. Regret, hunger, grief. Like the earth itself could recall everything we buried in it. That was before I spent 3 nights at a little-known RV park in eastern Wyoming, where prayers echo without lips to speak them, and where silence follows you long after you leave. It started like any other stretch of travel. I'd been on the road for 8 months, chasing isolation and open skies in a beat-up 2004 Winnebago Brave with 218,000 miles on it. My name's Jonah, 39 years old, former warehouse manager from Flagstaff, now trying to live with less noise in my head. Most days, the road gave me exactly that. A sense of space, detachment, peace. But sometimes it gives you something else. Sometimes the road knows when you're running and offers you places that make you stop. I'd been cutting through rural Wyoming, heading nowhere specific, just me, a dog-eared Atlas, and a gas tank leaning on E. I was looking for somewhere cheap, somewhere off-grid where I could refill my water and think. That's when I saw the hand-painted wooden sign nailed to a post near a gravel turnoff. Red Pine Hollow, Campground and Blessings. I wish I could say I was skeptical, but I wasn't. Not then. It had been raining for hours, and my nerves were cooked from driving through fog so thick it looked like spilled milk crawling over the highway. When I turned down that road, all I wanted was dry land. Somewhere still. Red Pine Hollow sat at the edge of a forgotten stretch of forest, somewhere between the Black Hills and the border towns that still haven't made it on digital maps. There was no reception, no Wi-Fi, the kind of place that somehow doesn't get satellites overhead, like it was deliberately excluded. When I pulled into the gravel lot, my headlights caught the glint of old aluminum trailers and rusted pickup trucks sunk halfway into the mud like they hadn't moved in years. But the strangest thing? It was quiet. Not peaceful, not serene, just too quiet. No wind, no birdsong, not even the hum of my engine sounded right, like the air was holding its breath. There was a small chapel near the center of the campground, whitewashed wood, peeling cross at the top, a bell with no rope. It stood crooked, like it was leaning toward the trees, as if listening for something. I didn't see a check-in booth, no camp host, just a single camper window glowing faint yellow near the far tree line. So I parked, stepped out, and called out a simple, "Hello." That's when I heard it. A voice, clear as a radio broadcast in the fog. It don't like strangers, not after what happened. I spun around. There was a man, maybe 60, hunched in a green army jacket with a tear down one sleeve. His beard was thick and gray, eyes sunk into deep hollows, but he didn't look homeless or unstable, just used up. He was sitting by the fire pit with no fire, whittling at a stick like he'd been waiting. "I'm just stopping for the night," I told him, trying to sound casual. "Didn't see a ranger or check-in office." He nodded slowly, carving another strip off the stick without looking up. "They don't run it anymore, not since the floods. But people still come." I asked what happened with the floods. He just shook his head. "It washed something loose," he said. "Underneath the chapel, buried too long. Folks thought they were just building over a spring, but it was deeper than that." Then he looked at me for the first time. "If you hear the prayers at night, don't answer back." I laughed. That awkward, polite kind of laugh you give when you're not sure if someone's serious. But he didn't smile. "You think I'm joking," he said. "You won't tomorrow." I should have gotten back in my RV right then. I should have trusted the first stirrings in my gut. Not fear, not yet, but something older. Something I think we all carry deep down but spend our lives ignoring. The instinct to leave before understanding why. But I didn't. I thanked him, nodded, walked away. I parked near the edge of the grove where the air smelled like pine and mildew. The rain had let up, but left everything slick and cold. I made some soup, listened to the wind rattle my vent covers, and tried to sleep. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was the rain dripping through the trees again, but then I heard my name. Not yelled, not called, prayed. Soft, deliberate, like a chant through a mouth full of river water. "Jonah, Jonah, Jonah, deliver him, carry him back." I shot upright in bed, heart pounding. My dog, Chester, a red-boned coonhound with bad hips and too much attitude, was growling low, head pressed to the floorboards. I turned off every light, opened the curtain a crack. Nothing but mist and dark shapes in the trees. But the whispering didn't stop. It moved, curling around the van like smoke. No footsteps, no shadows, just a steady murmur like someone pleading inside a confession booth made of pine bark and bone. When I finally slept again, I dreamed of submerged pews and a chapel filled with dark water. I saw people kneeling at the bottom, mouths wide open, bubbles rising from their throats. One of them turned and looked at me, and I recognized his face. It was mine. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of the camp. About a dozen RVs, all silent. One looked occupied, a newer Jayco with a Wyoming license plate and a child's tricycle chained to the bumper, but no one answered when I knocked. I checked the chapel. The door wasn't locked. Inside, there were rows of crooked benches, hymn books so water damaged they looked like sponge, and an altar made from old railway ties. Behind the pulpit, a single window let in a shaft of light that didn't touch the floor. Something was scratched into the wood along the altar base, half hidden under a layer of dust. Not all prayers go upward. I felt that sentence echo in my ribs like a struck tuning fork. I turned and walked out. I told myself I was being dramatic, that it was just an old quote or some teenager's idea of spooky graffiti. But the whispering hadn't been a dream. Chester was still on edge, refusing to leave the RV. Around noon, I spotted the old man again, sitting in the same spot. I asked him about the prayers. He wouldn't answer directly, just said, "They ain't ours. Not anymore. They were buried too long, the words got twisted." I asked what they wanted. He said, "Return, repetition. They want what was taken, what was promised." Then softer. "You won't remember this place the same after you leave. That's how it keeps folks coming back." I thought about leaving that day. I almost did. But there was something, not curiosity, not really, more like a pull, a subtle weight that told me I needed to see it through. That if I ran now, I'd carry it with me. That night, the prayers came again. But this time, they didn't whisper my name. They whispered hers. Her name was Elise, and I hadn't heard it spoken aloud in over 5 years. I sat bolt upright, fists clenched in the sheets, listening as that same wet, whispering voice circled the RV like a slow tide dragging along the shore. I couldn't see anything out the windows, only condensation and the faint suggestion of mist curling over the gravel, but the sound was unmistakable. Elise. She wandered. Bring her back. My throat tightened, my jaw locked, my hands began to tremble. Elise was my younger sister. She died in 2018 during a solo backpacking trip through the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Her body was never recovered. The sheriff called it inconclusive exposure. I called it impossible. Elise was an Eagle Scout, a wilderness guide, the kind of person who could read the wind and smell a storm coming before the clouds even turned. She didn't just vanish. Something happened out there, something I'd spent years trying to forget, and now that name, her name, was circling my RV like a prayer. I didn't sleep. Not that night. Not after that. I sat with my back against the cabinets, bear spray in one hand, flashlight in the other. Chester curled up by my feet but didn't snore. Not once. His eyes stayed open, locked on the front door like he expected it to open by itself. Morning came gray and waterlogged. The trees were slick with dew. I tried to convince myself it had been a dream, a trauma-fueled hallucination triggered by too many nights alone on the road. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it, because I smelled something new that morning, something that wasn't there before. Lilacs. Strong, fresh, overpowering. The scent hit me the moment I stepped outside. Sweet and cloying, too strong for October, too unnatural for a campsite with no flowers. It reminded me of Elise's funeral, where my aunt had filled the chapel with lilacs because they were her favorite. The air outside that morning smelled exactly like that chapel. I almost dropped to my knees, and just beyond the fire ring, sitting where dew had soaked the grass flat, was a small wooden object. I hadn't seen it the night before. A smooth, hand-carved totem about the size of a spool of thread, painted white with a cross etched on one side and a small spiral on the other. I didn't touch it. Something about the way it sat, too still, too placed, told me it wasn't for me to move. When I walked the camp that morning, everything felt off. The Jayco I'd seen the day before was gone, not just moved, gone. No tire tracks, no tricycle, no sign it had ever been there. I checked the gravel, dry, undisturbed, like it had never parked there at all. I knocked on the old trailers, called out, even circled the chapel again. Nothing, not a single soul answered, except him. He was already seated in that same chair, arms folded across his chest this time like he'd been waiting all night. You didn't leave, he said. Not a question, a statement. I asked him what the prayers were. He looked past me into the mist-choked trees. They're not words, not really, just pieces. Scraps of longing that took shape in the soil. Maybe they started as prayers. Maybe they ended as curses. Either way, they echo. He tapped the side of his head. They find what hurts most in you, and they pray it back to you. That's how they feed. I swallowed hard. Who's they? He gave me a look that didn't answer the question, but didn't need to. The hollow was built over a missionary station from 1873. A lot of folks don't know that. It was burned down after the second flood. Records got lost, but the stone foundation's still there, under the chapel. That's why it leans. Why would people build a campground over it? I asked. Because people forget, he said, or pretend to, and because memory's not stronger than a paycheck. He paused, stared at my RV. It brought you back to her, didn't it? I didn't answer. That night, I found another carving. This one was in my RV. It was on the underside of the cabinet above the bed. A spiral symbol carved with something jagged, maybe a knife. I didn't put it there. I hadn't seen it before. But I remembered it now, the same spiral etched on the totem outside. The shape twisted inward like a sinkhole, like something pulling you down toward a center that didn't exist. I sat for a long time staring at it. Something about it made my vision tilt, like the RV itself was listing to one side, like gravity had changed. I checked every lock. I set up a tripwire using a line of thread across the floor. I barricaded the door with my cooler. I even said a prayer, the first one since Elise died. Not to anyone in particular, just to anything listening that wasn't the whisperer outside. That night, the voice came again, but this time it was inside the RV. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when I heard it, but when I woke, it was sitting behind my eyes like pressure, like altitude sickness. My head throbbed. My mouth was dry. I sat up slowly, flashlight trembling in my hand, and swept the beam around the cabin. Nothing. No shadows. No movement. Just the sound of breathing that wasn't mine. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just steady. Too steady. Then a voice right beside me. Let her walk it backward. Let her walk it home. I turned. Nothing. But where my cooler had been, the one I'd propped against the door, there was just empty space. The cooler had been moved, neatly without sound, and set beside the cabinet like someone had unpacked a suitcase. The door was still locked, the windows shut tight, the thread across the floor, intact. I ran out into the night barefoot, heart pounding, flashlight swinging. The forest was still, the wind was gone, and the smell of lilacs hung in the air like a warning. I didn't come back inside until dawn. The next morning, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. Folded once, yellow paper, no envelope. Written in black ink in tight, shaky cursive. You were not supposed to stay past the second night. Leave now. The third prayer remembers. The third prayer answers. I spun around, scanning the campsite. No footprints, no sound. The man in the green jacket was gone. His fire pit was cold. His chair was tipped over. But carved into the tree beside it was something I hadn't seen before, or maybe hadn't recognized. A map. Crude but detailed. It showed the chapel, the road, a circle around the forest perimeter, and a dark, spiraling line in the center labeled only with two words, the mouth. I stared at it for a long time, and even then, after all of it, I didn't leave, because deep down, something told me that Elise had been here once too, and she hadn't been alone. I spent most of that third day doing exactly what I swore I wouldn't, digging into what wasn't mine. I studied the carved map like it was a last will and testament, each curve of the spiral pressing deeper into my gut like a blade turned inward. The mouth. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I recognized the shape. The same spiral carved into my cabinet, the same symbol on the totem. And something else was clawing its way to the surface of my memory, something Elise once told me, half joking, while we were camping as kids in Carson National Forest. She used to draw spirals in the dirt and say, they're not symbols. They're doors you can't close once you see them. I thought she was just being weird, but she wasn't. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much she used to talk about strange trails, places she couldn't find again, even with a compass. Forests where the birds went quiet all at once. A man she saw standing in the river who never broke the surface. I thought she'd been imagining it back then. Maybe I wanted her to be. But now I wondered if Red Pine Hollow had been calling to her long before it called to me. So I did what every stupid person in every cautionary tale does. I ignored the warning. I locked up Chester inside the RV. He wouldn't stop whining, wouldn't stop pressing his paws against the door like he knew. And I followed the path behind the chapel where the spiral had been marked. No trail markers, no signs, just a soft indentation in the grass where feet had walked once, long ago. The forest felt closer the deeper I went. The trees weren't especially tall, but they leaned inward like old men murmuring about something you couldn't hear. I walked slow, no bird song, no squirrels, just the dry click of branches above me, creaking in wind that didn't exist. I don't know how long I walked. The further I went, the less time made sense. The light didn't change, the air stayed the same temperature, that damp Wyoming October chill that never quite leaves your skin. Then the trees opened. And I found it. A depression in the ground, maybe 60 feet wide, shaped like a spiral carved into the forest floor. Each ring was a shallow trench, descending deeper toward the center like steps in soft earth. I stood at the edge, breath fogging in the still air, and felt that pressure again behind my eyes, that same humming ache from the night before. The center of the spiral was covered in moss and broken twigs, but something shimmered beneath it. Not water, not metal. Something else. I took a step closer. Then I heard a voice behind me. You came anyway. I turned so fast I slipped. There she was, a woman, maybe mid-30s, with matted hair tucked beneath a knit cap and dark circles under her eyes like bruises. She wore a ranger jacket, but it was faded, almost gray, with no visible patches or name tag. Her boots were soaked through, her hands were shaking, but her eyes, God, her eyes, looked like they'd seen something that hadn't finished looking back. I asked her who she was. She didn't answer at first. She pointed to the spiral. You're not supposed to step inside, not unless you have something to offer. What is it? I asked. She blinked slow, like she was pulling memories from deep water. A place where prayer goes wrong. A place people thought they could build over and forget, but you can't seal what was never closed. Her eyes met mine. You feel it, don't you? That grief that never healed right. That question that keeps bleeding under the bandage. I tried to ask how she knew about Elise, but she just turned and started walking away. And for some reason, I followed. She led me back through the woods in a zigzag pattern that didn't match the direction I'd come. The trees blurred. My head throbbed. Every now and then, I thought I saw figures between the pines. Shapes. Not people exactly, just outlines. The impression of someone standing still, watching. I blinked. Gone. She stopped at the edge of the chapel again. I hadn't realized how far we'd walked. My RV was visible through the trees now, just past the curve in the road. But something had changed. The light was off. Chester wasn't barking anymore. The woman turned to me, and for the first time she spoke with urgency. You need to go. Not without answers, I said. She stepped close. Her breath smelled like river mud. Red pine doesn't give answers. It just gives you back the thing you lost, and it doesn't care how it gives it. My hands clenched. You knew her. You knew Elise. She didn't flinch. We all do. Everyone who walks into the hollow long enough learns the names of the ones it keeps. And then she said something that broke me. She tried to pray her way out. The tears came fast and uninvited. My legs went weak. I fell against the side of a dead tree and tried to remember how to breathe. Elise was agnostic. She didn't pray. She never prayed. But maybe she did. Maybe whatever she saw out there, whatever found her, broke that in her. Maybe she begged to be remembered, and this place answered. The woman stepped back. You only get one choice here, Jonah. Carry it out with you or bury it deeper. But don't think it's ever gone. The campground always remembers. She walked into the woods again, and this time I didn't follow. When I got back to the RV, the front door was open, wide. Chester was gone. I searched for hours. I screamed his name until my throat tore. I left food, water, nothing. No sound, no footprints. Only the lingering smell of lilacs in the air, faint now, like a dying echo. Inside the RV, every cabinet was open, and inside the cabinet above the bed, the same one with the spiral, was a folded note that hadn't been there before. It said, "She left the prayer unfinished. Finish it, then you can choose." No signature, no explanation, just that single line. And beside the note, a second totem, identical to the first. Only this time, the spiral was burned inward, like something had been pushed too far. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the driver's seat with my forehead pressed to the steering wheel, the note on the dash, and the totem in my hand. I kept turning it over and over, feeling the scorched spiral with my thumb like I was trying to memorize it with skin instead of thought. That line, "She left the prayer unfinished," rolled through my head like a song I couldn't stop humming, even though I didn't know the words. I left the engine off. I didn't want to make noise, like I might draw something closer if I moved too suddenly. The campground outside was still dead quiet. No voices, no insects, no other campers. Red Pine Hollow had become a vacuum, like the rest of the world had peeled away and left just this loop of prayer, memory, and rot. Around 3:30 a.m., I saw something move. A figure barefoot walking between the chapel and the tree line. Tall, thin, dressed in white or maybe just pale from the fog. They didn't make a sound, just walked in a slow, deliberate circle around the fire pit, then stopped. They turned toward my RV. I ducked, heart pounding so loud I swear it shook the windshield. When I dared to peek again, they were gone. But there were footprints in the wet grass, and something else. The engine light blinked twice, then died. The same way it had the day I got the call about Elise, the day she vanished. I remember it because I'd left the van idling while I ran inside to take the call, and when I came back, it had stalled out. The light had blinked, once, then twice, then shut off completely. I never fixed it. I thought it was just a coincidence. I told myself it was. Now I wasn't sure about anything. At dawn, I made a decision. Not a smart one, not a brave one. Just the kind that happens when you've run out of better options and the weight in your chest refuses to lift until you face what's behind it. I took the second totem. I followed the path again. Only this time, I stepped into the spiral. I didn't even hesitate. I didn't check the sky or call for help or leave a note. I walked down those concentric trenches of earth until I reached the middle, where the moss-covered depression had shifted. The shimmer was stronger now. Not quite light, not quite water, just a thinness, like the membrane between this world and something else was stretched there. I knelt. I held both totems in my hands, and I said her name. Once, twice, 3 times. Illis. No wind, no change in air pressure, but the woods around me leaned. I can't explain that better than just leaned, like the trees tilted closer, like the soundscape stretched as if someone had slowed down a cassette tape inside my head. A low hum filled the space around me, vibrating through my ribs, my teeth, the soles of my feet, and then I heard the prayer again. But not in a whisper this time. It came from beneath me, muffled, rising like steam through the soil, dozens of voices, hundreds, all speaking at once, not in harmony, but in desperation, a cathedral of begging soaked into the ground. I tried to stand. I couldn't. My legs were locked, my arms heavy. Something pulled at the base of my spine like gravity had reversed just for me. Then I saw her. Not in front of me, not with my eyes, but with something deeper. A vision, maybe, a memory. She stood waist-deep in dark water, arms open, her lips moving fast, praying. I couldn't hear the words, but I recognized the fear in her face, that look that said, "Please, please, I'll give anything." And then something behind her moved. A long, pale shape, rising in the black like a curtain made of skin. I screamed her name, and the vision shattered. I was back in the spiral, kneeling, both totems clenched so hard they bit into my palms. Blood dotted the wood. The earth beneath me rumbled once. Not a quake, not a shift, just a warning. A response. I threw both totems into the center and ran. I don't remember the full sprint back. I only remember bursting out of the tree line and seeing my RV, doors shut, windows dark, quiet as death. My legs shook, my hands bled, my throat was raw from shouting, and then I heard scratching. Soft, familiar, rhythmic, from inside the RV. I flung open the door, and there he was. Chester, curled on the passenger seat like he'd never left, tail thumping slow, eyes heavy like he'd just woken from a deep, unnatural sleep. I dropped to my knees and hugged him so hard he yelped. He licked the blood from my hands like he didn't care what I'd done, where I'd been, or what I brought back with me. But then I noticed something else. On the driver's seat was a third totem. This one wasn't carved, it was grown. Wood twisted in natural spirals, bark stripped back in perfect concentric rings. No symbols, just form. Like the earth itself had shaped it to be understood without language. I picked it up, trembling, and beneath it, written on the back of a receipt from a gas station in Laramie I hadn't seen in weeks, were 5 words: "You don't have to forget." I don't know what happened beneath that chapel. I don't know what lives in the spiral. I don't know how or why Chester came back. But I do know this. I stayed one more night, just to see if the prayers returned. They didn't. The fog lifted the next morning, the silence broke or chirped, a breeze moved the trees. I left Red Pine Hollow with a third totem tucked inside my glove compartment and the feeling that something had been exchanged. Not ended, not destroyed, just traded. But every now and then, especially when I sleep in the pines, I hear water dripping where there is no water. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I see her. Not lost, not afraid, just waiting. I've tried to make sense. I've pored over topographical maps, cross-referenced weather anomalies, searched for historic missionary records in eastern Wyoming. I've even traced old soil surveys and pulled grainy satellite images that, if you look close, show a spiral depression near the coordinates where Red Pine Hollow should be. But there's nothing marked there now. No campground, no chapel, nothing but forest, like it was never built or like it was erased. I called the county clerk's office. They had no record of the land ever being used as a recreational site. No Red Pine Hollow, no fire permits, no property taxes, nothing. Just a note in a 1971 survey map that said, "Do not mark hollow, previous entry void, per section 3.4, reclamation." No one could tell me what section 3.4 was. No one had a copy of it. Every time I mention Red Pine to other RVers, I get the same confused look, like I'm misremembering, like I've got the name wrong. But once, in a Cracker Barrel parking lot in Nebraska, I met a woman named Loretta driving a beat-up fifth wheel who paused when I mentioned the name. Her hands were shaking before I even finished. She reached into her coat and pulled out something she kept in a velvet pouch around her neck. It was a totem, spiral burned in. When I asked her where she got it, she just said, "Near the chapel, long time ago." And that was all she'd say. What I didn't tell her, what I haven't told anyone until now, is what happened after I left. It started a week later in the hills outside Moab. I'd parked by a ridge that caught the morning light just right, turned off the ignition, and stepped outside for coffee. Chester ran ahead. He was himself again. Slow, grumbling, but content. The relief of having him back hadn't worn off. But when I came back to the RV that evening, the spiral was on my windshield, drawn in condensation. One continuous finger-traced line. Still fresh. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't want to. Because I'd started to understand what the campground meant by "you don't have to forget." It wasn't permission. It was a curse. I'd gone too far into the spiral. Said her name too many times. I hadn't just remembered her. I'd fed it. I gave the place what it wanted. Something unfinished. Something aching. And now it was coming with me. Not like a ghost. Not even like a haunting. But like a tether. In Kanab, I met a traveler named Rex who said he once camped off-grid in eastern Wyoming and woke up 100 miles east with no memory of how he got there. He only knew because his dashboard camera caught footage of him walking barefoot toward the trees at 3:17 a.m. He asked me what I knew about that place that prays. I told him I didn't know nearly enough, and I didn't sleep that night either. The dreams had started by then. Always the same, Elise in the water. Her face calm, her hands open, whispering. But she wasn't praying anymore. She was listening. I stopped trying to rationalize it, stopped trying to map it. You can't chart something that moves under the skin of the world. Something that slips between pine needles and satellite signals. Something that remembers you better than your own family. So I started writing everything down. The spiral. The woman in the ranger jacket. The chapel with no congregation. The totems. The sound of voices beneath the dirt. The smell of lilacs where none should grow. And I kept the third totem close. Not as a souvenir, as a warning. Because the spiral isn't just a place. It's a shape your soul remembers once it's seen. And sometimes, when the road gets quiet, when the GPS glitches or the forest gets too still, I think I feel it humming again. Not pulling this time, just reminding. I think that's how it begins again, with a whisper, or maybe a name, maybe yours. Because I met someone last month in Oregon, camped beside the Tillamook forest, who asked me a strange question. He said, "Have you ever smelled lilacs in a place they don't grow?" And his eyes, when he asked, same hollowness I saw in mine the day I left Red Pine Hollow. That's the last thing the campground does to you. It doesn't trap you. It opens you. And once you've heard the prayers, really heard them, you start recognizing the others who have too. A spiral connects. A spiral returns. A spiral remembers. I don't tell this story on the road unless I see it in someone's face first. That flicker of recognition when the mist won't burn off by noon, or the way they grip the wheel tighter driving through stretches of pine that feel just a little too silent. The ones who've been near it, they know. Not always consciously, but somewhere in their bones. The hollow doesn't mark you with scars or burns or curses that leave welts. It marks you in the way you lose track of days, the way your dog won't go near chapel bells anymore, the way maps start to feel wrong, like they're missing something, like you've been to a place that wasn't supposed to be there, but now its fingerprints are on your internal compass, and it changes how you hear silence. There's a kind of stillness I can't tolerate anymore. Like the kind that filled the air the night I finally tried to pray back. It happened in Utah, just a rest stop near an arroyo where the sagebrush stretched for miles. I'd gone days without sleep. The spiral wouldn't leave my dreams, and every time I closed my eyes, I could hear her again. Elise, yes, but also that choir of voices rising from the dirt in a language no one taught. That night, I sat by my fire, and I spoke not to the trees or to God, or even to her. I spoke to it, to red pine, to the thing under the chapel, the mouth, the memory place, the fold in the world. I said I understood. I said I didn't want it to take anyone else. I said, if I'm the offering, fine, just let her rest. And somewhere, it heard me, because the wind changed. No thunder, no scream, just a warm breeze in the middle of a cold desert night. And with it a smell that stopped my heart. Lilacs, but not overpowering, not haunting. Gentle, real, faint, like walking past a cemetery gate in May. I didn't sleep that night either, but not out of fear. I just listened. And the voices didn't return. The next morning there was a bird outside the RV. A raven, maybe. I don't know birds. But it watched me for a long time. Then it flew toward the east, toward Wyoming. I left 2 days later and haven't camped in the deep woods since. I stick to the desert now, or the coast, somewhere with space between the trees. Somewhere the shadows don't press so hard against the glass. I still drive, still move, still chase the rhythm of the road like it can fix something inside me, but I no longer do it to escape. I do it to remember on my own terms. Because if red pine taught me anything, it's this. There are places on this earth that remember your sorrow better than you do. And if you speak too loud into the silence, it may answer back. I don't know if Elise ever truly found peace. But sometimes when I park under a wide sky and let the night settle in, I feel her. Not as a ghost, not as a fear, but as a completion. Like whatever unfinished prayer she left behind, I finished it, or maybe just passed it along. Because 2 months ago, at a gas station near the Montana border, a boy no older than 20 stepped out of a faded van with the same spiral etched into the back of his hand. I didn't ask him about it. He didn't notice me, but he moved like someone who'd seen too much fog in his mirrors. And as he walked into the mini-mart, I noticed a smell on the air, soft, lingering, lilacs. So I stood there, engine still running, hand on the ignition, trying to decide what to do. And I realized something I hadn't let myself accept until then. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was part of it, not cursed, chosen. We all think horror is something that happens to us, that it's outside, creeping in through doors or darkness, but sometimes it's memory. Sometimes it's love that never got to say goodbye. Sometimes horror is a prayer spoken too late. So if you find yourself out on the road chasing the next horizon and you see a crooked chapel leaning into the woods where no town should be, don't go in. And if you do, don't answer the prayers, because not all prayers go upward. Some spiral down, some spiral back, and some are still waiting for you to finish them. I came to the Cascades looking for stillness. That word had been bouncing around in my head for months. Stillness, as if it could fix something in me. I wasn't on a paid assignment. No editor, no deadline, no one waiting on the shots. Just a personal project I'd convinced myself was about nature. But I think now it was about something else. The quieter I got out there, the more I could hear the things I'd buried. I parked my van just off an old logging road beyond the maintained forest boundary. There was a yellow notice nailed crooked to a Douglas fir that said service trail decommissioned, no access past this point. But there wasn't a chain, and the road was dry enough, so I kept going. A half mile down, I found a clearing padded with old pine duff and the mossy remains of a ranger post, just the bottom frame of a wooden shed eaten away at the corners, as if the earth had been slowly trying to swallow it. It was perfect. No tire tracks, no cell bars, just mist that rolled in low and thick every morning, and the muted hush of trees older than memory. I set up my ultralight tent with the door facing east, toward the rising sun, and out of habit more than need, I anchored it with surveyor's tape. Bright orange flags tied to 4 branches just outside each corner. The forest floor was soft but flat. No wind, no animals rustling the tent. Nothing. The first night was uneventful, cold enough for frost to build on the rainfly by dawn. When I stepped out barefoot to pee in the trees, I noticed the tape behind me fluttering slightly. The corner that should have faced west was now southeast. Maybe the fog had played tricks on me, or I'd oriented it wrong to begin with. I shrugged it off and made coffee on the camp stove. But I'd photographed the tent the night before. Wide shot, 28 millimeters, door facing east, rising moon behind. And when I reviewed the photo later, I saw it exactly the way I remembered. The tent had been facing east. But now it wasn't. I thought maybe I'd rotated it getting in and out, or maybe I'd rolled over in my sleep and it had shifted. The model wasn't freestanding. I didn't stake it into the ground. I could imagine it pivoting a bit on loose pine needles. It was an easy answer. I took the easy answer. I reoriented it before bed and used my tripod to shoot a still frame video, 30 seconds, from the same angle. Then I marked the door flap with chalk. I tied fresh tape. When I zipped the door shut behind me, I placed my audio recorder just outside the tent. I always sleep with one running. You'd be surprised what picks up. Branches falling, owls diving on rodents, a cougar once that screamed from 30 yards away. That kind of stuff sells on ambient stock libraries. Pays for gas. But I didn't sleep well. There was no wind, no footsteps, no real noise, just this growing sense of attention, as if the woods themselves were awake. That's the best I can describe it. You know how in the city you can fall asleep to chaos? Sirens, garbage trucks, people screaming 3 blocks away. But out here, the silence is so dense, so alive, that the slightest shift in it sounds like it's inside your skull. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke to something wrong. There was a breath outside the tent. Not an animal pant, not snorting or snuffling, but a breath like mine. Slow, human, exhaled. Then silence, then another, each one perfectly spaced, about 4 seconds apart. I held my own breath and tried not to move, but my ears were wide open. The sound was so soft I thought I imagined it until the rhythm changed. The inhale came faster, more anxious, like a person trying to calm themselves. I stayed frozen. I don't remember falling back asleep. I remember staring at the nylon wall of the tent until pale light filtered in. When I stepped outside, the tape was twisted. The tent was rotated at least 30 degrees clockwise. It now faced almost directly south. My camera was dead, the battery full the night before, and the chalk was gone, like it had been rubbed clean. I looked at the recorder. The LED blinked. It had captured something. My hands were shaking as I loaded the file. Windless silence for the first hour, a couple bugs, then, just after 2, a soft intake of breath. Then an exhale, steady, low, right up against the mic. Then again, and again. I counted 10 full cycles of breathing before it stopped. No footsteps, no animal calls, no shuffling or retreat, just silence. And then my own breath, but layered underneath. I rewound it 5 times, played it side by side with a voice memo I'd taken hours earlier, talking through my camera settings, same cadence, same shallow breath. The audio outside the tent was me. A match, not just someone breathing like me. It was me, only slower, a half beat behind, like an echo returning from somewhere it shouldn't have reached. That's when I started getting scared. That afternoon, I hiked 2 miles in a circle around the camp, checking for signs. I'm no hunter, but I've photographed enough elk to know what to look for. There were no tracks, no disturbed ground, no trail cameras, no hidden blinds. Just thick fir and hemlock, ferns brushing my knees, and mist. The forest here isn't just quiet, it absorbs you. The longer I stayed out, the more I started feeling like I wasn't moving through the woods, but the woods were rotating around me. I chalked it up to low blood sugar, maybe dehydration. Maybe the dreams I hadn't fully remembered were bleeding into my waking thoughts. I took pictures to reorient myself, logged GPS pins. I set the tent again with the same markers. This time I placed small stones in a circle around the base. I even staked one corner down, just to be sure. I wasn't trying to catch anything anymore. I was trying to prove that nothing was happening. But it happened again. That night, I stayed awake as long as I could until the cold set into my bones and my breath fogged the tent ceiling. I remember checking the time, 3:04 a.m. Then at 3:12, the breathing started again. Only this time, it came from the opposite side of the tent, not near the recorder. It circled. I felt a shadow pass just outside the fabric, not from light, but pressure. A dip in air, like something huge had moved but made no sound. I didn't unzip the flap. I didn't speak. I just listened, and I swear I heard myself whisper. Only I hadn't said anything. That morning I found all 4 stakes still planted, the stones undisturbed, the tape now in a perfect X, not the square I'd made, and the door was facing west, dead opposite. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone in my own skin. I packed up the tent slowly that morning, as if every motion might wake something that hadn't left yet. My hands didn't feel like mine. My fingers were slow to respond. I kept blinking, thinking there was something in my peripheral vision, not movement exactly, but shapes that refused to stay still. My camera still wasn't charging. I tried 2 batteries, swapped memory cards. Nothing. The screen flickered and died like the voltage wasn't quite right. My recorder was working, but when I played back the previous night's track, there was static over the breathing, high insectile buzzing, like cicadas slowed down and warped. I scrubbed the audio forward. Right before the recording ends, a whisper cuts in, too faint to identify, but I could swear it was saying my name. Just once. A rasp through dry pine needles. Not a shout, not a call for help. A mimicry. I didn't sleep the next night. I stayed up, leaning against the van with the recorder in my lap and a flashlight in my teeth. The fog came in early, thick enough to turn the forest into a wall of white 30 feet out. I kept the fire low. Every crack of a twig, every drip of dew from a branch sounded like intention. At 1:43 a.m., I heard someone unzip a tent. Not mine. Mine was packed away. The sound came from 30 yards into the trees. Same distinctive zip I'd used 100 times, right down to the slight stick at the end. Then silence, then breathing, then the unmistakable sound of me clearing my throat. That small, awkward cough I do sometimes when I'm alone. I stared into the trees, teeth clenched so tight I felt my jaw twitch. I knew if I called out it would answer, so I didn't. Instead, I hit record and whispered into the mic, "This is me, real time, no playback, no tricks." I kept the mic trained on the woods and waited. What came back 5 seconds later was my own voice, saying those same words out of sync by only a few seconds, but slightly off. The cadence was wrong, the vowels slurred, as if it was hearing me processing the words and then trying to become me. I shut it off. At dawn, I left the camp and hiked deeper as far as I could without trail markers. I needed elevation, somewhere the fog couldn't reach. I needed distance from that place, that loop, because that's what it had become. Every night the tent rotated. Every night something outside listened. Every night it moved a little closer to becoming me. By mid-afternoon, I'd made it to a ridge where the sun actually cut through. No mist, just rock and wind and dry silence. I rested, watched the forest floor below ripple with fog, and for the first time in 3 days, I felt like I could breathe. I cooked instant noodles on my stove. I wrote notes by hand, just to prove I still had language. Then I made the mistake of checking my photos. They were wrong. Images I don't remember taking, long exposure shots at night from outside the tent, angled downward, as if someone had stood over me and photographed the shelter, perfectly centered, while I was inside sleeping. And in one of the frames, I could see myself, lying still, zipper half open, face turned toward the door like I'd been expecting company, but I hadn't taken that photo, and I'd locked the camera in the van every night since the second morning. I kept scrolling, hands going numb. There were audio files too, dozens of them, not just my own recordings, but folders I hadn't created, labeled by date and time. Many were corrupted, static-filled, jittery, or blank, but a few were intact. One of them, time-stamped 3:16 a.m., started with footsteps on pine needles, then breathing, then me, my voice, whispering from a distance, "I don't want to be you," and then something else echoing back in the same voice, "You already are." I deleted the folder. I don't know why. Panic, anger, a gut impulse like slapping a spider off your leg, but it didn't stop it. That night, on the ridge, with the van below and the sky clear for the first time in days, I tried sleeping in the open. No tent, just a bag and my back to a boulder. It didn't help. I woke up at 2:09 a.m. with my mouth full of pine needles. My sleeping bag was gone. My boots were gone. I was back in the clearing. Only now, the tape markers were gone. The van was nowhere in sight. The mist was thick enough to beat on my skin, and all around me I could hear zippers, not one, but many, slowly opening and closing in unison. My body didn't respond, not right away. My limbs were stiff, like I'd been sleeping in sub-zero temps. My mind raced, but felt separated from the body it belonged to. It took minutes, actual minutes, before I could stand. I ran barefoot for what felt like an hour. The fog didn't break. Trees blurred past. I had no compass, no GPS, no bearings. I just ran toward what felt like distance. I don't remember how I found the van. I only remember the sound of gravel under my feet, the metal handle in my hand, and the sheer electric terror when I opened the back and saw my tent was set up again. Perfectly, 10 feet behind it. Door facing north. Something shifted behind the nylon wall. Not much, just a silhouette. Same height as me, same build. Backlit by the headlamp I'd left in the van. I drove without sleep. 8 hours west to the coast. Slept on a beach with a crowd nearby. Didn't even care about my gear. Left the tent, the stove, everything. I checked the GPS logs 2 days later. My route into the Cascades was there. My stops, my hikes. But on the night I slept on the ridge, the GPS showed a loop. Not a straight ascent, but a spiral, tightening back toward my original camp. Then nothing. A blank 2-hour window. Then the van turning back on. Then driving west. But I don't remember walking back to the van. I don't remember driving the first hour home. All I remember is waking up with pine needles in my mouth and that whisper, "You already are." I didn't go back to the woods after that. Not the Cascades, not the Sierras, not even the small trails behind my apartment complex. I couldn't stand the sound of wind moving through trees. Couldn't stand the way fog hung low over the highway in the morning like it was trying to take shape. I deleted the project files. Everything. Photos, audio, backup drives, even my cloud accounts. I stopped taking clients. Sold off my lenses, my ultralights, my stove. I even got rid of the van. Burned the last set of tires into the gravel when I left it with a for sale sign on the shoulder of I-5. It's been 7 months now. I live in the city. Brick walls, glass windows, rooftop antennas and sirens at 3 a.m. The noise is a comfort. You can't hear yourself breathing in it. You don't notice small rhythms out of sync with your own. But sometimes in the early morning, when the city is still and the refrigerator hum falls silent for just a second, I hear it again, the breathing, just off. Not inside the apartment, not in the hall, not even in the building. It's like it's coming through the walls themselves, finding a way through ductwork and drywall. Quiet but clear. Time to mine, but lagging by a breath. And every time I try to hold mine, to cut it off, it keeps going. Like it's caught the pattern now and doesn't need me anymore. I started sleeping with music playing, sometimes news radio. Something constant and erratic enough to break the rhythm. I thought it helped. I hoped it helped. But last week I woke up to the sound of my own voice again. Not speaking, not yelling, just a single sentence whispered right next to my head. Let's try again. I found pine needles on my pillow. Not the dry, flat ones from sidewalk pines in the city. These were thick, sappy, the kind you only get deep in the Pacific Ranges, the kind that stick to your fingers like resin. I held one under the desk lamp for 10 minutes, trying to convince myself it had to be from an old jacket or my boots or a prop from an old chute I hadn't boxed up. But I knew better. I can feel it sometimes, that spiral. It's not just the forest anymore. It's in the way my apartment door creaks open wider than I left it. It's in the way my laundry sometimes comes out damp, even when I know I ran the dry cycle. It's in the way my own reflection lingers just a moment longer in the window after I've turned away. And sometimes, only sometimes, I check the orientation of my bed when I go to sleep. I push the foot of it flush against the wall. I line up the headboard with the windowsill. I make small mental notes. The lamp is on the right, the corner of the rug sticks out on the left, and in the morning, it's wrong. It's not a lot, just 5 degrees off, maybe 10, but it's enough to notice, enough to know. Something is still turning me in the night, repositioning me, making small adjustments like it's calibrating, like it's relearning me. I used to think it was something in the woods, some old thing tied to a place, but I don't believe that anymore. Whatever it is, it doesn't live in the Cascades. It learns there. It starts there. But once it knows you, once it maps you, your gait, your breath, the length of your stride, it doesn't stay. It follows, quiet, patient, rehearsing you until the difference between your shadow and the thing casting it becomes so thin, even you forget which side you're on. People always ask why I don't shoot anymore. Why I dropped off the grid after so many years traveling, so many portfolios in glossy magazines. They think it's burnout. They think it's grief. And I let them. Because if I told them the truth, that the walls in my home still shift, that I don't always recognize my own voice, that I see myself walk past in dreams I'm not awake for, they'd say I need help. But what I need is distance. From everyone, from anything that could learn me, because whatever ever I brought back out of those woods, it's still watching, still waiting. And I think it's almost ready. The other night, I found something in my apartment, something small. At first, I thought it was a bundle of dead pine needles, like the ones from the tent. But when I looked closer, I realized it was hair, a small braid of my own hair tied with the same orange surveyor tape I'd used to mark my tent. There was no note. No footprints, no sign of entry, just a gentle reminder that I'm not the only one who remembers. And now, when I close my eyes, I don't dream of the forest. I dream of my own body, lying still inside a tent I didn't set up. Door facing north, breathing, just a beat too late.